that I wanted to share with you all today called The Power of the Tongue. And it just kind of speaks to manifesting, the realities of what we're hoping for and thinking about the future that we're looking to build. I think when we are thinking about building the future, we have to kind of think about what it means to believe that it's already here, to believe that we can actually achieve the goals that we have in mind. So this poem kind of speaks to, speaking things into existence and just recognizing the power in our tongue. Since the day I learned my first word, self-expression has always been second nature. I'm a child prodigy of third world parents, so I have to tell my forefathers' stories on paper. Silence for too long. The strength of my tongue sentenced me to a life of righting wrongs. My penmanship bridges the gaps of intergenerational dialogues, marginalized between the lines of lands my parents traveled, sacrificing the familiarity of home to make ease for me life's inevitable battles. So who am I to not be what I was destined? Who are we to not be what we are destined? Despite school systems that labeled me and sanctioned me to detention, despite the target on my back and private funding to put my melanin in prison correction, I will not be your stereotype. I am made from the essence of stardust above aerial heights. It is not my fault you cannot see the light in me. You cannot enlighten me on your capitalist commodities. I'm the rose that still adapted to blossom out of colonized concrete, capitalizing on conquered conquests my predecessors paved, placing poetic politic on history's page. It is these pages cut from my family trees that once hung our forefathers as slaves. It is these pages I tell their stories. It is these lines they once hung from I celebrate their glory, just to stay connected to my roots. See, these pages are sacred. It's how hip hop's essence began as pure truth. But see, these days I can't relate to what a lot of rappers are saying in the booth. You see, the spoken word is a gift. And you can emanate life or death by the mere intention coming out of your lips. We can speak dreams into existence, creating a world united or divided. So you can choose to be the change or remain silenced. You can choose to be the change or remain silenced. By size, the tongue is the strongest muscle in our bodies for a reason, a tool to connect us to the divine. More than just speaking, it keeps us believing. It is a portal between time and space mixed, the inspiration of ancient hieroglyphs. So our words can build dynasties and mend broken bonds. Our words can create vitality and give us the freedom of redemption songs. Our words can live beyond us like MLK's dream to see us free at last. So be mindful of the words and the intentions that depart from the sacredness of your tongue. We are powerful vessels. The Creator etched presence into our lungs so you have a gift within you. Leave a legacy that will continue. Etch your name in the dendrochronology of history's pages. Do not allow the from and to on your tombstone just to be dated. Let the dash in between reveal the story you told and of the magic that you created. Thank you very much, y'all. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and share little inspirational words. And I think if you take anything away from it, as we continue to move on and to fulfill this journey, this process that we have, this goal that we have in mind, I think it's important to kind of think about how we reflect on the words we use and how we reflect on our mindset and how that ultimately can kind of prepare the foundation and the bedrock for what it is that we're looking to build. But thank you for having me, and I look forward to hearing more.
Thank you, Randell. That was beautiful. All right, we are going to start. I will hand it over to Sarah. She will lead the panel.
Sure. Data is abundant. Data is a tool for prosperity and economic dynamism. Data is a national currency. Data is power, and data must be sacrosanct. But data has been weaponized and wielded by the privileged, used as a force to marginalize, isolate, and reinforce policy inaction and societal negligence of vulnerable, distinct groups on the periphery of the economy and sectors. Dismantling the oppressive forces of data colonialism enacts solidarity, sovereignty, and subsequently equitable solutions for many pervasive societal challenges. Mainstream data colonialism defines problems from biased lenses, which informs inaccurate and despot policy decisions. Contemporary frameworks of data collection, research, analysis, reporting, and dissemination ultimately determines who matters, who is heard, seen, and valued. These antiquated models decide where and how resources are allocated and ensures the status quo is maintained. The collection and presentation of data has remained within the hands of the few, those with the privilege, affluence, and influence to perpetuate colonial infrastructures that benefit their own personal networks, as well as national and international policy objectives. Diversity of thought, perspectives, socialization, and lived experience are pillars of inclusive, accessible, and equitable data governance. This was written by our executive director a year ago, and I thought it would be timely to share as we begin this panel. So I'll pass it on to our conversation stewards of the day, Danya and Victor.
Thank you so much, fam. And I wrote that like 6 months ago. It wasn't a year ago. I give thanks, though. We appreciate you. So we're not going to read the bios of all our panelists because they're so prolific and they've done so much work in community that it would take the entire session. But we want to give thanks to Catherine Babcock, the CEO of Capital W, Narinder Dami, our remarkable colleague, the founder of New Power Labs and president of the Sonar Foundation, Liban Abakar, co-founder of the Foundation for Black Communities, Alana Landsberg-Lewis, the co-creator of Voices Amplified, Arlene Macdonald, the chair of the Charitable Sector Data Working Group, and last but not least, our brother Ryan O'Neill Knight, who has joined us. So I'm going to hand it off to you, Danya.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Victor. And thank you all for inviting me into this space. I join you as a white settler, first to the US and most recently to Canada, stewarding Algonquin and Anishinaabe lands near Ottawa. So really pleased to be here, really pleased for this conversation. Sarah, thanks so much for grounding us in the purpose of why we're here and reminding me and maybe others of us that I really have been brought up in so many of these systems that you described as antiquated, and it's wonderful to be in community with people to remake them. So we'll start, Liban, with you. We have seen, probably all of us, the really remarkable impacts of the Foundation for Black Communities. Our philanthropic sector has failed to support Black communities in Canada over its history. Wondering if you could start us off by speaking a little bit to how data has informed the work that you're doing.
Good morning, everyone. Peace, Randell. I have a bet with myself to see if I'm ever gonna get used to like your poetry, and I don't think it's gonna happen. But it's there. I'm gonna see. Every single time I'm like, yo, let's do something else. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Setsi for inviting me. Thank you for all the other co-panelists on here. I'm actually here to really listen to y'all. So I'm looking forward to learning. I have a love-hate relationship with data in many ways, to be honest. The unfunded report, for those of you who don't know, behind the scenes of it is that it costs us about $5,000 to put that report together in about 2 months. I repeat one more time, $5,000 in about 2 months, because the information was already there. Right? The data was already there and it just needed to be compiled. And I still resent the fact that we had to do it. I resent the fact that Black communities had to be the one to put together a story that showed just how much we're being neglected. I think it is an incredibly unfortunate experience that those that are experiencing in many ways the harm have to then tell everyone else, hey, look and listen and acknowledge me and believe me, because that's what data really did for the Foundation for Black Communities. It took what was already well known, well understood, and more importantly, clearly experienced, and it put it in the face of those that were incredibly callous towards that experience of Black communities. But the report was released in December 2020, but we had already been in a 6-month journey in deep conversation with the broad sector of philanthropy. And every single time we chatted with them, they humored us, they spoke to us, they were kind, but it was clear that they were in disbelief until the sheer numbers showed them what was actually happening. And then they expressed dismay, shock, surprise, which was shocking and surprising to us. Like, we have been telling you for 6 months, and for years before that, if you had listened to anyone who was knocking your door tent making, that the social service sector in the Black community was decimated and could not withstand an unprecedented public health crisis that was putting extraordinary stress on our demands, and really left our sector unable to meet those demands. And so the unfunded report is not groundbreaking. I know we describe it as that, but let me say for the first time ever, it's not groundbreaking. It just says that systematic structural racism has once again played out in an industry. I don't think that surprises anyone. And yet, data was important for us to break through in the discussion. When it was the real hard numbers to say that only 7 cents out of every $100 was going towards supporting Black-led, Black-serving organizations, it quantified the problem for folks. It created somehow some cognitive, avatar that they could then engage with, because engaging with Black people is very hard, right? But the avatar of data is a little bit easier. It's a bit desensitized, right? Sorry, it's sanitized, it's separate. I'm dealing with the problem through data, but not with the community, because the response to the data has been one thing. The response to community has been fundamentally separate. Foundations have stepped up and said, you're right, we need to give more to Black communities, but we're going to do it ourselves. The data, though, said that you can't do it yourself. You actually need to be working with Black communities to do this work. So again, data is quite interesting because it creates this avatar that organized, like white institutions can go and say, hey, I now can do this on my own, versus no, wait a minute. This data actually proves that you should never go on this journey by yourself. So I in my last comment, and I realize it's a bit long-winded, is that data is nice to have in describing the problem, but it's necessary to describe where the solution needs to occur. I repeat one more time. Data is a very nice thing to have when you want to describe the problem, but you already have folks experiencing the challenge that you should already be listening to. You don't need to hear from 1,000 people that their experience is true. But what you do need is the data to tell you, here's where we are, and here's what progress or a goalpost for changing to looks like. And we then have the ability to measure against whether our activities are changing things. So that's why I tell folks, let's dial back the impact of the unfunded report, right? Let's not give it too much credit. The data sure helped elucidate a problem a little bit clearer and assign causality between those whose actions are resulting in these outcomes. But the real challenge of data is whether or not it can be used as an accountability mechanism that tells us just how far we've gone once we've discovered the problem, or just how stagnant we are, even though the problem is right in our face.
Adjei, thank you so much for your leadership and those actionable insights, my brother. We appreciate you. Our next question is to Alana. The statement, "We count who counts," is important to us. Once again, we count who counts. In your international work and work in Canada, how significant is data?
Thank you so much, Victor, and Randell and Sarah and Ivan. It's just beautiful to hear the power of words and to be reminded of the mindfulness that we have to bring to these conversations always. I don't speak as an expert on data. I have to say that from the get-go. And like you, Ivan, I'm a believer, unbeliever. But the part around data of dismantling power is what interests me. And internationally, in the work that I've been lucky to be a part of in community, there are so many devastating impacts of colonial and capitalist systems of inequality that have been embedded in data, not just the product of data, but the collection of data, the analysis of the data, who's counted, who's not. And I think that some of the work, and just to give some examples of things that I have seen, in the AIDS pandemic, where the prevalence rate of HIV and AIDS was the highest in sub-Saharan Africa, countries and international organizations were not collecting any data on women over 50. And yet it was grandmothers and older women who were stepping in to care for legions of children orphaned by AIDS, but data on their circumstances, their realities, their susceptibility was completely absent. I'm thinking about also the intersection of tuberculosis and HIV. Communities were clamoring to tell the story. They knew exactly what was happening. They could have told it, and they tried to and did articulate it over and over, but no data was collected for decades. I think that there have been efforts, I know all of you know this as well, if not better, to count women's labor in the home as part of the GDP. That has never been included. And then, of course, closer to home, even on the T3010 charity data form, there's nowhere for organizations who identify as LGBTQ2S+, or who are doing work with 2S LGBTQ+ communities. There's nowhere even to identify that way. And so that is completely invisibilized. And so I think that one of the things that I have benefited from in listening to all of you in different community conversations and with Victor and Setsi and Sarah is that, the data can make communities, crises, lived realities visible, but it can equally and has been used in those who collect and privilege power and data to make all of these realities invisible as well. And I think that there's good reason for that. I mean, I think that too often without data, policies and funds don't flow. And so we know that the invisibilization of the lived reality and voices of community after community is not unintentional. And I think, Victor, when you emphasize the importance of who's counted and whose voices are counted and realities are counted, it's also always important for us to turn the lens back to who's counting. And it is those who support and have devised the systems of oppression and exclusion who are still holding the reins of counting and invisibilizing. And so the sort of colonial notion of data as neutral, like that everyman standard that people use, that as if it's neutral, as if numbers don't reflect privilege and power and intent, and that intent isn't embedded in every aspect of data, is part of the politics of exclusion. And so I think the decolonization, the democratization of data is absolutely essential to the fight for equality and dismantling systemic and structural systems that perpetuate it. And I think data, and I hear Liban so deeply in this, that data is both the source of frustration and outrage, because it is just it has been weaponized, as you say, Sarah, so deeply for millennia. But this is the movement now, I think, for communities to take it back, take it over, and decolonize this.
Ilana, thank you so much. It's so wonderful to meet you. Liban, thank you so much for speaking, particularly to the idea. One thing I took is that data can reveal as much about those who are receiving it as those that as about the content that it was meant to be about. I hear both of you talking about how experience and voice and stories are data, and we're accountable to holding it as sacrosanct as numbers. And Ilana, just really appreciate those concrete stories. Let's continue to talk about decolonizing data. And Ryan, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what decolonizing data means to you.
Oh, thanks, Dana. And really, decolonizing data is so important, and hence why we've been working with Catherine and her team and many others on working on this Decolonizing Data Institute. And many racialized communities have never been really at the forefront of the data and the ownership of it. But we do have to realize that decolonization is a process. It's going to be something that takes time. And my brother Liban often talks to me about giving ourselves time and space to get stuff like this done. And most recently, we've been able to actually work with a Black-led research firm on one of the first Black labor market assessments, and being able to dig into the database that ACBN has to really answer or ask the right questions from our perspective and not just reading reports that other organizations are doing about the Black community, but for the Black community to actually be doing the reports, we now realize the data that we're able to pull out is going to allow us to create better decisions. And that's something that sometimes the research doesn't allow because it's from the wrong perspective. So when I think of decolonizing data, it's really one, again, I think Elena mentioned who is counting, and then when the research is done, how are we using it to make better decisions instead of just using it as a press release and an announcement. But because we've been able to do this research, now we can see the power of decolonizing the data. So being able to work with launching the Decolonizing Data Institute, I feel is going to create so much rich data that will make better decisions. So the next 5 years, 50 years, even 100 years, I always call this the infinity game. There's no real finish line. It's now we're building the right foundation to be able to move forward in the right direction.
So we talked about colonizing data, and I think it's really, really important to also think about what kinds of data have gained supremacy in terms of the process, right? You know, we talk about the way data is collected and then conveyed. And in many communities, so I come from a country called Somalia. For those of you, oh, my camera's off, forgive me. For those of you who know Somalia, we're, and it's probably the reason why I'm so drawn to what Randell does. We're known as the nation of poets. We're an oratory society. In fact, it wasn't until 1970 that we even had a written alphabet. Again, I repeat, 1970 until we had a written alphabet. Our stories are written in epics that folks memorize and have this incredible ability to recall in great detail. And so there's a sort of a collective gathering of information that is shared, and that everyone then has a responsibility to like go and seek and be a part of. So there's an active requirement on the members of Somali society to go and get information, not only in written form, but in all forms that it's available. And I think it's really important when we think about collecting data, how important it is that we accept the data in all of its forms, not just in statistical charts, not only in a peer-reviewed method, right? But data can be shared in along a pretty large and expansive continuum. And so I think that's important when we talk about decolonizing data. We're talking about the way that it's collected, because it then allows folks to actually share information, not in a survey, but through conversation, right? It also then it's important how it's shared, whether it's shared in an auditory form, like today we call it a podcast, right? But in the past, it was just a town forum, right? It was a conversation between an elder transmitting information to others. So I think that's critically important. I understand the limitations of that process. I certainly do, and I acknowledge it. But we're talking about ensuring we're using the multitude of available collection methods versus just one particular, or no, I won't say one particular, but a set of tools that is deemed as the only way to collect information, then to transcribe and transmit that information back. So it's important, you know, the experience of those who lived and withstood the neglect of the philanthropic sector was data. It just wasn't in the form that folks needed or wanted to, more importantly, hear. And so we had to put out a report, but that doesn't invalidate all of the other data points, which are the lives of human beings that we see, work with, and know to be true. So I just wanted to add that point to what Ryan shared.
That's remarkably helpful, Brother Adjei. We give thanks. Our next question is to you, Catherine. At Capital W, you've done remarkable initiatives in the data space. When you think about the T3010 forms and data that can support various sectors, what are your thoughts?